Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So what I'm going to do today, I will talk about migrating Aura component to LWC because obviously, it is a pretty common question that get asked. How do we migrate Aura component to LWC, right? Because your company might have developed Aura components, say 5, 6 years ago, and they're looking to migrate LWC to get all the benefits of having LWC in your org, right? Now, migrating Aura component can be a challenging task or could be a simple activity, right? So I would like to discuss, what it means to migrate and the things you should watch out for, because I've been involved in a couple of the components that have been migrated from Aura to LWC, and I know the challenges that's been involved. So, okay, let's get started, right? Okay, so now two kinds of migration strategy you can use, okay? Incremental migration or big bang migration, okay? Now, incremental migration is that where you slowly, migrate one thing at a time. You just pay attention to, the smallest thing in place, and then you migrate it. I'll explain in details. Just wanted to give you a quick intro what it means. Big bang is just migrate everything at once, right? You decide, okay, we're gonna migrate this, all at once, right? Okay, and you hire it, like you have 4 developers working on it. You got like 8 or 10 or a component. You ask 4 developers, okay, this is a cutoff date. I want everything to be migrated and tested and good to go, right? So yeah, I mean, it could work for some companies. It may not work for some companies, right? Okay, let's talk about incremental migration. Okay, so one of the challenges, when we were trying to migrate Aura to LWC is that because we had like at least 20 components to migrate, and all the 20 components were very very complex ones, right? Except 2 of them were medium complexity. So the approach what we used, right? We picked up the small one, right? The medium complexity, to see the challenges what we're going to face to migrate that component to LWC and then replicate the same pattern, in other components and perhaps up the stuff, right? I mean, up the stuff in the means that up uh, the level of up the time, perhaps, right? Okay, so here how we started it. So the first thing what we did, right? We had a meeting, right? Okay, so meeting with architects, right, and developers, and just to see, hey, this is a business requirement what we have. Obviously, you need to have a user story, right? The business story in place, and then we had a discussion, right? Okay, so this is what gonna take to migrate, and can we do parallel development at the same time? Because obviously, you need to remember one thing, right? You cannot turn off your old LWC in production, right? Just because you wanted to migrate, you have to still let it run, and you have to do thorough testing, right? Because obviously, you don't want it to introduce bugs, right, which can impact the system performance or data performance or whatever, or data integrity. So the first thing what we did, right, we picked a very small component, which is like a medium-sized complexity, and then we worked on the things, which we can do right on for this time frame, and certain things we had to keep into consideration, right? We agreed that even the Salesforce agrees the Lightning Web component and Aura component can coexist in the same runtime. So there's no problem with that. Aura component can contain Lightning Web components. So what we can do is, right, we if like for instance, we built a LWC component and we wanted to use that under utility bar, right? So I was not able to use, I mean, we were not able to do that like a couple of years ago. So what we did, we built an Aura component as a container, and we stuck the LWC inside, and then we used the Aura component in the utility bar. So that was one of the scenario where we couldn't completely use migrate to LWC, right? That was 2 years ago. Okay, now things would have been different. So Lightning Web component can't contain an Aura component, so you can't do the other way around, right? You can't assume that, okay, let me build a Lightning Web component container and I just start deploying Aura on top of it. That doesn't really work, unfortunately. It can work the other way around. So one thing you have to keep into consideration. So if an Aura component has facets that contain other Aura component, you must migrate those other component, right? So if Aura component rely on other Aura component, so you have to factor that into consideration before you migrate it, right? You can't say I wanted to migrate just one part to it, another part let it remains in Aura, right? So you just need to have a migration strategy. So that's one of the reasons why I said you need to go back to your drawing board, invite your architects and developers, lead developers, who will be involved in development of this of the new component. So work out the time frame, performance issues, how you can use the data, like wired adapters, right? They're different. In order you do things in a different way. Retrieving data is different. Can you reuse your JavaScript file? Okay. So if you have a generic JavaScript file, you don't really have to migrate, right? You can reuse that in LWC. Okay. So you need to worry about like your HTML template and other stuff, right? Because it's different. Aura has a separate syntax, and Aura works a little bit different. Aura framework is very different to LWC framework, right? So you just need to factor those things into consideration. And also, the most important thing which people ignore is the level of expertise, right? If you have a deadline in place and your team is not at all skilled with LWC, you cannot commit to that deadline, right? You will most likely end up in breaking things. So you need to factor that as well, okay? The team expertise is very important. Yeah, it's true that LWC is a new, it's a cool and like a nice framework out there. It's like a new kid in the town, right? Everyone talks about it. But the thing is that you need to have a right experience and skill set to migrate it. And so if you don't, then you need to factor that learning curve into consideration, right? Before you migrate. So that's why having a meeting, having a discussion, having a product discussion, migration strategy in place is very important. Okay. And once you migrate, what happened to the old component? Should you keep it just in case something goes wrong? Or, you know, you stick to the LWC, and build on it. Because what might happen, you migrate a component and a critical error started popping up, right? For whatever reason, right? It might be a testing failure or could be something. Then would you be rolling back you to old Aura component, or would you be fixing a bug in LWC? So you need to have those things into consideration, right? It's not pretty straightforward stuff, right? It looks straightforward, but you need to do a lot of thinking before you do a migration. Okay. So now another thing I wanted to talk about migrating, right? Aura component has Aura bundle is different to LWC bundle. In LWC, you have your HTML file, your CSS file, your JavaScript file, and the configuration file, right? So in Aura, you have something called sample, like markup, controller, helper, renderer, CSS, documentation, design, SVG, right? So these things will equate to LWC. So for instance, sample.cmp is sample.html in component LWC. A sample controller will be sample.javascript. So you need to understand this, right? So documentation, there's nothing available here. SVG, nothing available. So sample design, it's your meta.xml. Sorry, go back. That's where your all the configuration, right? Configuration means whether your LWC can be used in Lightning Flow or can be used as a record page, on a record page or on a home page. So all kind of things you define under meta.xml, right? So you need to factor those into consideration. So okay, then we talk about the Big Bang migration. Like I said, migrating all your Aura component to LWC at once. It works for some companies. If your components are pretty simple, you don't need much testing, then yeah, you can go that route. But if you have a very super complex Aura component, then it involves a lot of testing and a lot of planning, and migrating all together at once may not be a great option, right? So it's just a case by case. So yeah, that's pretty much I wanted to talk about in terms of migration. The reason I wanted to bring this topic, right, because I have experienced this problem when I was migrating. The first thing, the most important thing, right, I would say that if you're planning to migrate in order to LWC, have a design meeting. It's very important. Bring your architects, bring your senior developers or lead developers or senior consultants, right, whoever will be involved in it, and also bring your product manager, perhaps, right, to keep the time frame going and understand the implications of migrating, the cost involved, right? Costing is very important, right? Sometimes you have to justify to customer why you're trying to migrate it, right? They will say, hey, it's going to cost us, let's say, 30 grand. Why should we be paying it when things are working well, right? So as a consultant or as an architect, it's your responsibility to go and convince your product manager job to convince the customer why it's important, why this step is necessary, right? And yeah, and then the, the skill set is very important, right? If you have nobody in your team who is good at LWC, who can do Aura very well, so you need to factor those training time and learning curve into consideration, right? So that's why it's important to bring a product manager into picture. So yeah, that's all I wanted to cover in today's episode. Hope you guys have amazing Saturday. Adios.